Ladies and gentlemen, it is a great honor to present to you the king of Euroscepticism, Mr. Nigel Farage.
Make me sound like Elvis Presley, but it's very, very kind of you. Thank you. Well, good morning, everybody. Happy Hauman Day. Or Happy Europe Day. Or it's really not Europe Day at all, is it? It's EU Day. And every year, on the 9th of May, there is an attempt by the institutions of the European Union to try and make this into a great big day of celebration. So I couldn't think of a better or a more appropriate day to book this room and to invite you along to launch this book than today. You see, I don't think it's today we should be celebrating. I think it's yesterday we should be celebrating. The 8th of May, Victory in Europe Day. A day when the German Nazi machine was finally destroyed and crushed, and a day when democracy came back to many countries in Europe. It's that we should be celebrating, and it's that kind of Europe that we need to strive and fight for, because I really do feel that Europe as a place has been completely and utterly hijacked by a set of institutions and by a career political class who themselves have all done extremely well out of this project, but who in the attempt to keep their dream together are now making vast numbers of Europeans not only suffer, but lose their self-respect, lose their pride, and lose their liberty. You know, I don't doubt for one moment that the intentions of Jean Monnet originally were honourable. You know, and I sort of try and put yourself in the position of the French. You know, in 1870, the Germans come. In 1914, the Germans come. And in 1940, the Germans come. You know, 3 wars, total disaster, catastrophe, and so the idea that we've got to try and make a better future, we've got to try and stop Europe going to war again. So, you know, the thinking behind this was good. I don't believe that there was some sort of terrible conspiracy from day one. There wasn't some sort of figure from a James Bond film, you know, sitting in Brussels stroking a white cat, planning the domination of Europe. I've never believed that. I've always believed that the intentions originally were good. Indeed, just as the intentions of communism in 1917 were good. You know, the communists who brought down the Tsar, they did what they did, believing they'd make the world a better place. In fact, very often, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. I am afraid to say that if we look at what Europe has become, it has become something where diverse nations, nations with different languages, with different cultures, different histories, different wines, different cheeses, have all been forced together under one new form of government. And this has all taken place without anybody ever giving their consent. I mean, we in the United Kingdom were never given the choice. Do you want to become part of a political union? We were told that we joined a common market, and we were asked to endorse that. And that was now nearly 40 years ago. And indeed, in recent times, when citizens have been given the chance in referendums to express an opinion, they've often said no. Remember the French in 2005? There was a no, wasn't there, to the proposed European Constitution. That was followed a few days later by the Dutch, who gave an even more resounding no. But those peoples were completely ignored, and the whole thing was rebranded as the Lisbon Treaty, and there were even boasts. Certainly the former Italian Prime Minister, Amato, boasted that the great thing about calling it a treaty and not a constitution is that we won't need to put it to referendums. Now, one country, of course, did have a referendum, that was Ireland, and the Irish said no, but were forced to vote again and bullied into voting yes. And for me, 2005 was the pivot point. 2005 was when this project became absolutely naked in tooth and claw. From 2005, the argument that the European Union was somehow a little bit undemocratic and it could be made better, that argument died. Because since 2005 it's been clear that this project is actually fundamentally anti-democratic. They don't want democracy. They don't believe in democracy. And we've seen elected prime ministers. Firstly, of course, in Greece, where Mr. Papandreou dared to stand up and suggest that he might put to the Greek people the idea in a referendum of whether they should stay in the euro or not. And that, of course, was blasphemy for the body boys of Brussels, and he was removed. And we then shortly thereafter saw Mr. Berlusconi. Mr. Berlusconi may have been politically past his sell-by date, but to see the way that he was unceremoniously removed and replaced by yet another former Goldman Sachs employee and former European Commissioner. And we're told it's all okay because Italy is now under good management. And indeed, the last time my good friend Hauman van Rompuy came to the European Parliament, he told us we've turned the corner. The euro crisis is over. Well, as you've seen over the course of the weekend, the euro crisis is not over. There are two rebellions that are now afoot. One is a civil and social rebellion, and we've seen it on the streets of Athens and every other major Greek town and city, and we've seen specimens of it in Portugal and Spain, and this is an uprising of people who are saying, you have taken from us our ability to determine our own future, and we will now take the law into our own hands. That's the first form of rebellion that is taking place in Europe, and that's happening in the south. But there is something now happening in the north that I think is even more fundamental than that. It started in Finland with Timo Soini and the True Finns last year, when they scored 19% in a general election. And we're now seeing, right across Northern Europe, completely brand new political parties of both the right and the left that are rising up, not just against the austerity package, but against the whole concept of their lives being governed and determined by institutions that are totally remote. Now, all of this, I hope, will come to a head as soon as possible. Because my big fear is this, that even though, from the start of this European project, even though I concede they were well-intentioned, they made one fundamental mistake. Their mistake was in believing that the wars that we'd suffered were caused because nation-states existed. That was their belief. And so if you eradicate nation-states, there'll be no more war. They seem to have forgotten that we tried this in 1920. We had lots of little Balkan states that were frequently warring with each other, going around shooting archdukes and causing all sorts of mayhem. And the great and the good in 1920 said, we have the solution. Rather than having lots of little nation-states, we'll bring them all together. We'll give them one flag, one currency, one anthem, one army, one police force, and when they're all together, in what we'll call Yugoslavia, there'll be peace forever. Well, in the lifetimes even of the youngest people in this room, we've seen the worst things happening on mainland Europe since 1945, as people have fought and done dreadful things to try and take back their rights of national self-determination. You cannot turn the peoples of Europe, the countries of Europe, the nations of Europe, into a single state without the consent of the people. And that consent has not been given. And therefore what we are involved in is a very dangerous project. Now the onus, I think, is very much upon us now. Those of us that have been the critics, and I've certainly done my best inside the European Parliament to, I think, offer helpful advice, but I suppose I've been somewhat critical over the years. But it's now incumbent upon us, and that's why I think in many ways this book is very important. And by the way, my congratulations to you for the absolutely fantastic contributors. There are some really very, very good, brainy people that have written in this book. Now it's up to us now to offer the alternative vision. You know, I might be known as the great Eurosceptic, but I'm not anti-European. I mean, that would be quite ludicrous. As I often say to people, before I was in politics, I had a real job. For 20 years, I worked in the real world, and during that time, I worked for 2 French companies. Okay, they both sacked me for insubordination, but I'm trying not to bear the grudge. Look, we want to live in a Europe where we trade together, where we cooperate together, where we are good next door neighbours with each other. We want to live in a Europe where we share information through organisations like Interpol, but we don't believe we need Europol. We must recognise that trafficking of people, that the drugs trade, that pollution We have to recognise that these things do cross borders, and we need a good forum within which we can agree sensible cooperation. But what we don't need is an unelected European Commission having the sole right to make our legislation. What we don't need is a European Court of Justice in Luxembourg that overrules our own national courts. And frankly, we don't need an elected European Parliament. It would be far better when we're trying to agree cooperation for groups of national parliamentarians to come together. And we don't need that wretched flag. Where is it? They take it away. They probably thought I cut it up or something. But, you know, I owe no allegiance to that flag whatsoever. And I would suggest that nor do 90% of sensible people that live in this European time zone. The only people I meet that actually support these European institutions are those that are now in the pay of those institutions. The whole thing has become a self-serving, self-fulfilling prophecy of its own elites. It is losing touch with the outside world. We are the future, and this book will make a contribution towards it, and I'm very pleased and proud to be on this morning. Thank you.